love, as expressed in love thy neighbor as thyself, is the essence of morality, and ethics is the attempt, indeed the struggle, to understand love both as a relation with others and within oneself. Beyond the heavy-laden do's and don'ts that characterize traditional conceptions of morality, ethics is ultimately about the expression of freedom under the guidance of love. Truths and untruths reside in many perspectives and in many traditions, and promiscuity in entertaining new or different ideas is not unfaithful. You cannot be a lover of truth without acquainting oneself with the thinking of other beliefs and different perspectives. When it comes to the love of truth, it is dogmatism and ideological rigidity that are unfaithful. Dialectical partners, like partners in a marriage or in any loving relationship, share the best of what each has to offer. But while loving relationships may at times become stale, dialectical relationships are well built for rebirth and reinvention. The dialectical interpenetration of opposites, a term coined by Friedrich Engels, is perhaps not too far off key as a quasi-sexual metaphor. The metaphors of sex and dance as expressions of dialectic are not without merit because relationships between persons and between beliefs are infused with possibilities, hopes, disappointments, temptations, fears, offers, rejections, unions, disunions, connections, and interconnections. Two people can fall in love even if one sees the other as far from perfect. Each finds positive qualities that compensate for perceived imperfections. And we can also fall in love with philosophies or ideologies without embracing them completely. The moral requirement in both amorous and intellectual love is their grounding in loving intention. A morally bankrupt philosophy, no less than a morally bankrupt individual, is not worthy of love. Intellectual honesty requires and demands some intellectual promiscuity, if only because we should know something about ideas before we reject them. Consider the outrage that is the scorning of a child if she or he is born of parents of a race different from oneself. And is this outrage in essence much different than arbitrarily rejecting a belief because of prejudice against the philosophical or cultural tradition from which it originates? All the mindless, knee-jerk denigrating by so-called liberals or so-called conservatives by one or the other is a common example of prejudice that only serves to poison political discourse. A beautiful child born of an interracial couple is a union of opposites that can be viewed as a metaphor for the natural synthesis of dialectic. Hegel and Marx tried to artificially force dialectical synthesis, but the evolving coherence of moral actuality derives in part from a dialectical dance whose outcome cannot be predicted with certainty even if it may, with insight, perhaps be anticipated. In my book, Ethical Empowerment, I argue that morality is the rational struggle to bring the world in accordance with love. But this does not happen autonomously or in isolation, but through a combination of personal reflection and consensus. One would like to pronounce that dialectic is the irresistible force of moral reason. But it would be more accurate to say that it is a force that struggles to be irresistible, but settles for just being listened to. There are many distractions to the rational mind besides the moral sense. The moral sense is really only but one of the Nietzschean instincts that would like to emerge as dominant. I am understating. Morality is humanity's most noble instinct, but it could still fail in the end. The unity of opposites, in the case of the moral dialectic, is a harmonization of oppositional tensions. The interplay between coherent moral forces and those that are less coherent or are morally incoherent is the nexus of dialectical change. Love is a dialogical expression and has dialectical force. The love-based nature of morality transcends the myopia of dogma and narrow egocentric thinking. Love values the glory of the individual as much as the glory of the collective and the glory of the union of both. Self-sacrifice is at times required, but the sacrifice of oneself can also be a submission to the false idols of ideology. And self-sacrifice for the sake of the group can be brave, but it can also be weak if the comfort of group acceptance takes priority over repressed acknowledgement of a more fundamental moral actuality. There are great acts of self or egoism, and there are great acts of selflessness or altruism. But in either case, an egoistic act that is moral benefits the other, just as an altruistic act that is moral benefits the self. There are no purely selfless acts because the beauty of pure selflessness inevitably becomes a deserving object of pride that one has in oneself. And self-interested acts can also benefit others. Yes, a self-interested act can be thoroughly consistent with altruism. It is often acknowledged that love transcends difference. Obstacles and barriers between people are created by differences concerning what is thought or believed, or of what is possessed, or what is thought to be possessed or should be possessed. Differences exist between the haves and the have-nots. Mistrust develops between believers and non-believers. Animosities develop between members and non-members. Anger, jealousy, envy, greed, and feelings of superiority or inferiority are some of the names given to the negative emotions, and they are the emotive indicators of moral strife and of a world that has failed to adequately understand the underlying unity that binds it together. But it is often said that in love we find the ability to forgive. In love we joyfully share with loved ones. In love we have the compassion to help the downtrodden or the unfortunate. In love we are able to experience the incomparable joy of giving. In love we are capable of letting bygones be bygones, so that while the past is not forgotten, we nonetheless grow because of it. In love we are inspired to achieve greatness because it provides us with the vision to see beyond our own mortal insignificance and to see the miracle, wonder, and potential of our own individual existence. And yet, how tragic it is that these words generally remain only words, except in the intimate connections between friends and loved ones, or in the deeds of inspired benefactors. The transcendent force of love as the essence of morality has routinely escaped the province of ethics, and as a result, ethics is often unempowered. William James wrote that the elementary forces of ethics are probably as plural as those of physics are. Modern-day physics understands the elemental forces of nature as far less plural than James believed. And I submit that it is likewise the case that the elemental forces of morality are also few. The question concerning plurality in both cases has not so much to do with the absolute constitution of force, which may well be monistic, but rather with the practical and intellectually effective breakdown of a monistic principle into the fewest comprehensible and usable parts. Too many elements may create complications to an extent that only confuses and increases difficulty. But too few elements may take away necessary anchors and points of reference that make analysis and solutions possible. The traditional ethical theories have almost no practical use outside the classroom because they do little to enlighten the actuality of the moral contexts that are resistant to theoretical explanation. The non-ideological and non-dogmatic truth is that emergent moral actualities transcend rules and preconception. The three basic dualistic elements of ethics proposed in ethical empowerment are fairness, beneficence, and compassion. They could certainly be formulated differently, and I have no doubt that they are ripe for criticism. But from my point of view, it is important and indeed vital to emphasize the dualistic nature of the fundamental ethical principles and their implicit and ubiquitous presence in ethical reasoning so as to stimulate meaningful discussion, debate, and inquiry. The descriptions of the basic ethical dualisms described in the book are closely interconnected and reflect differing aspects of the unifying principle of morality. Each dualism entails the other two. And the three dualisms are effectively six principles, because each pole may be thought of as a distinct principle: self-regarding fairness, self-regarding beneficence, self-regarding compassion, other regarding fairness, other regarding beneficence, and other regarding compassion. Each dualistic pole is a focal point for analysis, and each basic ethical dualism is part of the dialectical dance of love and morality.